Marcus Johnson sat nervously in his wheelchair outside courtroom 302 of the Washington County Courthouse. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the blue tie his mother had helped him put on that morning. At 16, this was his first time in a courthouse, and the massive wooden doors in front of him seemed more intimidating than any challenge he'd faced before. "Are you ready, sweetheart?" Dr. Patricia Johnson, his mother, squeezed his shoulder gently. She was dressed in a modest navy suit, her graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. The worry lines around her eyes were more visible today, but her voice remained steady and strong. Marcus nodded, trying to control the involuntary movements that came with his cerebral palsy. The condition affected his motor skills, making simple tasks like speaking or writing take extra effort, but it had never touched his brilliant mind. If only people could see past his physical limitations to recognize the thoughts and ideas that raced through his head every day. As they waited for their case to be called, Marcus replayed the events that had brought them here. 6 months of dedicated work on his solar energy project, countless nights spent in his makeshift basement laboratory, and the breakthrough that even he hadn't expected to achieve. Then came the crushing blow. Westbrook High School's decision to disqualify him from the state science finals, claiming his work was too advanced to be original. The door opened, and their lawyer, Sarah Chen, emerged with a reassuring smile. "They're ready for us," she said, holding the door as Dr. Johnson wheeled Marcus into the courtroom. The room was smaller than Marcus had imagined from the legal dramas he occasionally watched. Dark wood panels lined the walls, and the morning sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the floor. The sound of his wheelchair seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet space. Judge Richard Hamilton sat elevated behind his bench, peering down at them through wire-rimmed glasses. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly as Marcus entered, a mixture of impatience and something else that Marcus had seen too many times before: underestimation. Case number 2025 CV 156, Johnson versus Westbrook High School Board of Education, the court clerk announced. As their lawyer began her opening statement, Marcus observed Judge Hamilton's body language. The judge's fingers drummed against his desk, his attention seemingly elsewhere. When Ms. Chen mentioned Marcus's project, a revolutionary approach to increasing solar panel efficiency through a new semiconductor configuration, the judge's eyebrows rose skeptically. "Ms. Chen," Judge Hamilton interrupted, his voice carrying a hint of condescension, "are you suggesting that this—" He paused, glancing at Marcus. "Young man developed a breakthrough in solar technology that has eluded professional scientists." Marcus felt his mother tense beside him. It was a familiar reaction. She'd spent years defending him against similar dismissive attitudes. "Your Honor," Miss Chen replied firmly, "Marcus Johnson's academic record speaks for itself. We have documentation of his perfect S8 scores, achieved at age 14, and testimonials from multiple science teachers regarding his exceptional abilities." The judge leaned back in his chair, making no attempt to hide his disbelief. "And how are we to verify that this work is truly his own? Given his condition, how can we be certain he wasn't assisted, or that someone else didn't do the work entirely?" A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Marcus felt his face grow hot, not from embarrassment but from determination. He had faced this kind of prejudice before, and each time it only strengthened his resolve to prove himself. Dr. Johnson's hand found his, squeezing gently. They had discussed this possibility, that the judge, like so many others, might see only his disability and not his capability, but they were prepared. Marcus straightened in his wheelchair as much as his body would allow. His mind was already racing ahead, organizing the complex equations and principles he would need to explain. He knew that somewhere in this courtroom, probably within the next few hours, he would have his chance to show everyone exactly what he was capable of. The school board's lawyer rose to speak, clutching a thick folder of documents. But Marcus barely heard him. He was focused on the judge, watching as Hamilton continued to regard him with that same dismissive look. Marcus allowed himself a small, internal smile. He recognized that look. He'd seen it countless times before, right before it changed someone's entire perspective. The morning session was just beginning, and Marcus Johnson was ready to shatter some preconceptions. The morning session progressed, and Judge Hamilton's skepticism became increasingly apparent. His comments grew more dismissive as the school board's lawyer presented their case. "So, we're expected to believe," Judge Hamilton said, adjusting his glasses, that a student with severe physical limitations somehow created this complex scientific breakthrough. His tone dripped with sarcasm as he flipped through the project documents. The school board's lawyer, Mr. Peterson, stood confidently at his podium. Your Honor, Westbrook High School has a reputation for academic excellence. When we received Mr. Johnson's project submission, several red flags were immediately raised. The level of sophistication in the research goes far beyond what any high school student could achieve, regardless of their circumstances. Marcus felt each word like a physical blow, but his mind remained sharp and focused. He watched as Mr. Peterson displayed slides of his project, pointing out what they claimed were impossibly advanced calculations and concepts. Furthermore, Mr. Peterson continued, the physical demands of conducting such detailed laboratory work would be beyond someone with Mr. Johnson's condition. We believe this is a clear case of external assistance, possibly from his mother, Dr. Johnson, who has access to college-level resources. At this accusation, Dr. Johnson started to rise, but Sarah Chen gently touched her arm, shaking her head. This wasn't the moment to react emotionally. Judge Hamilton turned his attention to Marcus, speaking as if addressing a small child. Young man, do you understand what's happening here? Do you know why we're all gathered today? The condescension in his voice made several observers shift uncomfortably in their seats. Marcus nodded, his eyes never leaving the judge's face. Verbal responses only, please, Judge Hamilton said impatiently. Can you explain yourself? Marcus took a deep breath, controlling his speech carefully as he had practiced countless times. Yes, Your Honor, I understand completely. Then perhaps you'd like to explain how someone in your situation could possibly develop such an advanced solar energy system. The judge's words hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah Chen stood quickly. Your Honor, I object to this line of questioning. My client's physical disability has no bearing on his intellectual capabilities. Overruled, Judge Hamilton said sharply. I think it's entirely relevant. We need to establish the facts here. He turned back to Marcus. Well? The courtroom fell silent as Marcus began to speak. Despite his somewhat labored speech, his words were clear and deliberate. Your Honor, would you like me to explain the quantum mechanical principles behind my semiconductor design, or would you prefer I start with the basic thermodynamic equations that led to my breakthrough? For the first time that morning, Judge Hamilton's confident demeanor faltered slightly. Marcus continued, I can also demonstrate how I used computer modeling to test my theories, which eliminated the need for extensive physical manipulation of materials. A quiet murmur spread through the courtroom. Even Mr. Peterson looked surprised at Marcus's articulate response. I developed special tools, Marcus added, gesturing to a box beside his wheelchair, to help me work around my physical limitations. Would you like to see them? Before the judge could respond, Sarah Chen produced a laptop. Your Honor, we have video documentation of Marcus working on his project over the past 6 months. Every stage was recorded to prevent exactly this kind of challenge to his work. Judge Hamilton's face had begun to redden slightly. He cleared his throat, clearly caught off guard by this turn of events. Well, that would be relevant evidence, yes. As the court officer set up the video equipment, Marcus caught his mother smiling proudly. The first video began to play, showing Marcus working in his adapted home laboratory, using specially designed tools to conduct his experiments. The footage clearly showed him working independently, making adjustments, taking notes on his computer, and running tests. The judge leaned forward, his expression shifting from skepticism to something approaching curiosity. His earlier mockery had been replaced by an uncomfortable silence as he watched Marcus on screen explaining complex scientific concepts to his webcam, documenting every step of his process. When the video ended, Judge Hamilton removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. The courtroom remained silent, waiting for his response. The morning's proceedings had taken an unexpected turn, and it was becoming clear that the judge's preconceptions were beginning to crumble. Marcus sat quietly in his wheelchair, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The real demonstration of his abilities was yet to come, and he was just getting started. When court resumed after the lunch break, Dr. Patricia Johnson took the witness stand. Her years of experience as a community college professor were evident in her composed demeanor as she faced the courtroom. Dr. Johnson, Sarah Chen began, please tell us about Marcus's early educational development. Taking a deep breath, Dr. Johnson shared a story that made even Judge Hamilton lean forward in his seat. Marcus was reading physics textbooks at age 6, she explained. While other children struggled with basic addition, he was solving complex mathematical equations. His mind has always worked differently. She pulled out a worn notebook from her bag. This is from when Marcus was 7. He filled it with calculations about why the sky is blue, going far beyond simple explanations into detailed mathematical models of light scattering. The school board's lawyer, Mr. Peterson, shifted uncomfortably as Dr. Johnson continued presenting evidence of Marcus's extraordinary intelligence. She showed Marcus's perfect S8 scores, achieved at 14, and letters from renowned scientists who had corresponded with him over the years. Yes, Marcus needs help with physical tasks, Dr. Johnson acknowledged, her voice steady, but his mind has never needed assistance. In fact, there are many concepts he understands that I, with my PhD, struggle to grasp. Judge Hamilton, who had been notably quieter since the morning session, spoke up. Do you have any independent verification of these achievements? Something beyond family records? Actually, Your Honor, we do, Sarah Chen interjected. She motioned to a distinguished-looking man in the gallery. Dr. James Morrison from MIT is here to testify. Dr. Morrison, a leading expert in solar energy technology, approached the witness stand. His testimony caused a stir in the courtroom as he described his online conversations with Marcus over the past year. I initially assumed I was corresponding with a graduate student or young professor, Dr. Morrison admitted. The questions Marcus asked and the theories he proposed showed a deep understanding of quantum mechanics that most PhD candidates don't possess. When I learned he was a 16-year-old high school student with cerebral palsy, I was amazed but not entirely surprised. Some of the greatest minds in science have overcome similar challenges. Judge Hamilton's demeanor had changed significantly. Gone was the mocking tone from the morning session. Instead, he listened intently as Dr. Morrison explained the technical merits of Marcus's solar panel innovation. The elegance of this solution lies in its simplicity, Dr. Morrison explained. While others have tried complex methods to increase solar panel efficiency, Marcus approached the problem from an entirely new angle. His design could potentially increase energy conversion rates by 40% while reducing production costs. The judge turned to Marcus, who had been quietly taking notes on his tablet. Young man, he said, his voice notably more respectful than before, would you be willing to explain your theory to the court? Marcus's face lit up. This was the moment he had been waiting for. Sarah Chen quickly set up a digital presentation system, and Marcus began to explain his work, his voice measured but clear. As he spoke, something remarkable happened in the courtroom. Despite his physical struggles with speech, the clarity of his ideas shone through. He explained complex scientific concepts in ways that made them understandable to everyone present, occasionally adding touches of humor that made even the stern-faced judge smile. Dr. Johnson watched with tears in her eyes as her son commanded the attention of the entire courtroom. The years of fighting for recognition, of insisting that her son's physical limitations didn't define his capabilities, were finally being vindicated. Even Mr. Peterson, the school board's lawyer, was seen taking notes during Marcus's explanation. The same calculations that the school had dismissed as impossible for a student to produce were now being explained by their creator with undeniable expertise. As this part of the session drew to a close, Judge Hamilton removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. The transformation in his attitude was striking. The man who had begun the day mocking a disabled teen was now looking at Marcus with unmistakable respect. I think, the judge said slowly, we need to take a brief recess to process this information. He looked directly at Marcus. Young man, I believe I owe you an apology, but let's save that for after we've heard all the evidence. As people began filing out for the recess, Marcus caught his mother's eye and smiled. They both knew that the tide had turned, but the most surprising revelations were still to come. After the recess, the atmosphere in courtroom 302 had shifted dramatically. Judge Hamilton, who had started the day with undisguised skepticism, now watched Marcus with keen interest as the young inventor prepared to demonstrate his project. Your Honor, Sarah Chen announced, Marcus would like to show a live demonstration of his solar panel prototype. She gestured to two court officers who carefully brought in a sealed box containing Marcus's invention. The judge nodded, his earlier dismissiveness replaced by genuine curiosity. Proceed. Marcus wheeled himself to the front of the courtroom, where a small table had been set up. His hands trembled slightly from excitement rather than nervousness now. Using the specialized tools he had designed, he began assembling his prototype with practiced precision. What you're about to see, Marcus explained, his speech careful but confident, is a working model of my enhanced solar cell. Traditional solar panels waste significant energy through heat loss and reflection. My design addresses both issues simultaneously. The courtroom watched in fascination as Marcus connected his device to a monitoring system. Even Mr. Peterson, the school board's lawyer, had abandoned his earlier hostile stance and leaned forward to get a better view. The key innovation, Marcus continued, lies in the semiconductor layer's unique crystal structure. He pulled up detailed microscope images on the courtroom's display screen. By modifying the atomic arrangement, we can capture photons that usually bounce off or pass through conventional panels. Judge Hamilton raised his hand, interrupting for the first time. Marcus, could you explain that in simpler terms for those of us who aren't physicists? Marcus smiled, appreciating the judge's new respectful tone. Imagine trying to catch raindrops with a net. Traditional solar panels are like nets with big holes. Many drops slip through. My design is like a perfect net that catches nearly every drop, but also knows how to use each one effectively. A murmur of understanding rippled through the courtroom. Marcus then proceeded with his demonstration, using a controlled light source to show the difference between a standard solar panel and his innovation. The results were undeniable. The monitoring equipment showed Marcus's panel generating significantly more power than the control panel under identical conditions. The efficiency increase was exactly as he had claimed, 40% higher than conventional technology. Dr. Morrison, the MIT professor, stood up excitedly. This is remarkable. The stability readings are even better than your theoretical models suggested. The school board's lawyer looked increasingly uncomfortable. His entire case had been built on the assumption that Marcus's work was either fraudulent or done by others. Now, watching the young inventor confidently answer complex technical questions from one of the country's leading solar energy experts, Mr. Peterson's position seemed increasingly untenable. Judge Hamilton removed his glasses, a gesture that had become familiar throughout the day, but this time it was accompanied by a look of genuine admiration. Marcus, he said, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest. The courtroom fell silent. Why didn't you patent this technology before entering it in the school science competition? This invention could be worth millions. Marcus's response came without hesitation. Your Honor, I believe scientific discoveries should benefit everyone. I entered the competition hoping to gain validation from the scientific community before publishing my research openly. I want this technology to be accessible to anyone who can use it to help fight climate change. The judge sat back, visibly moved by this answer. Dr. Johnson wiped tears from her eyes, while Sarah Chen smiled triumphantly. Furthermore, Marcus added, his voice growing stronger, I wanted to prove that disabilities don't define what a person can achieve. The school's rejection of my project wasn't just about me. It was about every student who's ever been underestimated. The silence that followed was profound. Judge Hamilton looked at the school board's representatives, then back at Marcus, his decision clearly taking shape in his mind. I believe, the judge said slowly, we've seen more than enough evidence for today. But before we proceed further, I would like to offer a personal observation. He paused, making eye contact with Marcus. In my 30 years on the bench, I have rarely been so thoroughly impressed, not just by your scientific achievement, but by your character, young man. As the courtroom absorbed these words, it was clear to everyone present that they were witnessing not just the vindication of one student's work, but a powerful reminder about the danger of prejudging anyone's capabilities. The next phase of the hearing brought even more surprises as 3 professors from prestigious universities took the stand. First among them was Dr. Elena Rodriguez from Stanford University's Department of Engineering, who had reviewed Marcus's work independently. What we're seeing here, Dr. Rodriguez explained, holding up Marcus's detailed research notes, is not just innovative, it's revolutionary. The mathematical models alone show a level of understanding that most doctoral candidates would envy. She proceeded to display a series of complex equations on the courtroom screen. These calculations weren't copied from anywhere. They represent an entirely new approach to the problem of solar energy conversion. I've checked every major research database. This is original work. The school board representatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats as Dr. Rodriguez continued. Mr. Peterson's earlier confidence had completely evaporated, especially when she pointed out specific elements that could only have come from original thinking. Next came Dr. William Chen from Caltech, who had conducted independent tests on Marcus's prototype. When I first received the device, he testified, I was skeptical. Many people claimed to have revolutionary solar technology, but this, he gestured toward Marcus's invention, this actually works exactly as described. We verified the 40% efficiency increase in our labs under controlled conditions. Judge Hamilton, who had been taking detailed notes, looked up. And in your professional opinion, Dr. Chen, could this work have been copied or done by someone else? Absolutely not, Dr. Chen replied firmly. During our video calls, Marcus explained every aspect of his invention in detail. He understood not just what he had created, but why it works at the quantum level. That kind of comprehensive understanding can't be faked. The third expert witness was Dr. Sarah Thompson from MIT's Environmental Science Department. She approached the subject from a different angle, focusing on the potential real-world impact of Marcus's invention. If implemented on a large scale, she explained, this technology could significantly accelerate our transition to renewable energy. The cost reduction alone would make solar power accessible to millions more people. She turned to look directly at Marcus. This young man hasn't just created an impressive science project, he's potentially changed the future of clean energy. During these testimonies, Marcus sat quietly, occasionally typing notes on his tablet. His mother watched proudly as expert after expert validated what she had known all along about her son's exceptional abilities. The school board's defense began to crumble further when their own science department head, Mr. Roberts, took the stand. Under questioning from Sarah Chen, he was forced to admit several crucial points. Yes, he conceded reluctantly, we did not actually test the device ourselves before rejecting it. We assumed it couldn't work based on our preconceptions. And those preconceptions, Sarah Chen pressed, were they based on the scientific merit of the project or on your assumptions about Marcus's capabilities? Mr. Roberts looked down at his hands. I suppose we let our bias affect our judgment. The turning point came when Judge Hamilton himself asked to examine Marcus's research notebooks. As he flipped through pages of calculations, diagrams, and carefully documented experiments, his expression grew increasingly thoughtful. Marcus, the judge said, looking up from the notebooks, these dates in the margins, they show you worked on this project for over 2 years. Yes, Your Honor, Marcus replied. I started with the basic concept in 9th grade, but it took many iterations to get it right. And all this time, the judge continued, you kept working despite knowing the school might not accept your project. Marcus's response captured the essence of his character. Your Honor, I didn't do it for the school's approval. I did it because I believed it was possible, and because it could help people. That was enough reason to try. The courtroom fell silent as the weight of these words sank in. Judge Hamilton looked at the school board members, then at their lawyer, who seemed to be shrinking in his seat. I believe, the judge announced, we should take a brief recess before final arguments, but I want everyone to consider something during this break. He paused, making eye contact with each school board member. Sometimes our greatest failures come not from what we do, but from what we fail to see in others. As the courtroom began to clear for the recess, the outcome was becoming increasingly clear. But for Marcus, the most significant victory had already been won, not just in proving his capabilities, but in changing minds and challenging assumptions about what was possible. Following the recess, Judge Hamilton's demeanor had transformed completely from his earlier skepticism. He sat at his bench with Marcus's research journals still open before him, occasionally glancing between them and the young inventor with unconcealed admiration. Before we proceed with final arguments, the judge announced, I have some questions for Marcus that I believe will help bring this matter to its proper conclusion. Marcus wheeled himself forward, his posture straight despite his physical challenges. The courtroom had filled even more during the break, as word had spread about the remarkable proceedings. Marcus, Judge Hamilton began, his voice carrying a warmth that had been entirely absent that morning, I see here that you've already received correspondence from several universities. Would you share that information with the court? Sarah Chen handed Marcus a folder, and he spoke clearly, despite his speech challenges. Yes, Your Honor. I've received early admission offers from MIT, Stanford, and Princeton. Harvard's physics department has also expressed interest in my research. The judge nodded, then held up a letter that had been submitted into evidence. I'm looking at an offer here from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. They're interested in developing your technology. Are you aware of this? Yes, sir, Marcus replied. They contacted me last week after reviewing my preliminary patent application. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Mr. Peterson, the school board's lawyer, slumped slightly in his chair. And yet, the judge continued, despite these opportunities, you still want to compete in the state science fair. Why is that important to you? Marcus took a moment to organize his thoughts. Your Honor, winning or losing isn't the point. I want to show other students, especially those with disabilities, that they shouldn't let anyone define their limitations. Science fairs are where young minds get inspired. That's where I first fell in love with science, watching other students present their projects when I was 9. Judge Hamilton removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes, a gesture that now seemed more emotional than tired. I see. He turned to the school board representatives. And after everything we've heard today, does the school board wish to maintain its position? The board members conferred quietly among themselves before their chairman stood up. No, Your Honor. He paused, looking at Marcus. We were wrong, very wrong. We would like to withdraw our objection to Marcus's participation in the state finals. The judge nodded but wasn't finished. I believe a more formal apology is in order, don't you? The chairman cleared his throat. Marcus, on behalf of the entire school board, I want to apologize for our unfair treatment of your work and our assumptions about your capabilities. We failed you, and in doing so, we failed our mission as educators. Marcus smiled graciously. Apology accepted. Judge Hamilton then did something unexpected. He rose from his bench and walked down to where Marcus sat. Young man, I owe you an apology as well. My behavior this morning was inexcusable. I let prejudice cloud my judgment, and in doing so, I nearly participated in a grave injustice. The courtroom was silent as the judge continued. Your brilliance is matched only by your character, and I am humbled to have witnessed both today. He extended his hand to Marcus, who shook it firmly despite his tremors. Turning back to address the full courtroom, Judge Hamilton's voice carried the weight of authority and conviction. Let the record show that not only is Marcus Johnson to be allowed to compete in the state science finals, but this court formally recognizes his extraordinary contribution to both science and human dignity. He then added, furthermore, I am recommending that the school board review and revise its policies regarding students with disabilities, with input from Marcus if he's willing to provide it. Dr. Johnson wiped tears from her eyes as Sarah Chen gathered their documents. The school board members, looking thoroughly chastened, began filing out of the courtroom. Just before adjourning, Judge Hamilton had one final comment. Marcus, I look forward to reading about your future achievements. Something tells me this is just the beginning of a remarkable journey. As they prepared to leave the courtroom, reporters were already gathering outside, eager to share the story of how a young inventor had changed not just the future of solar energy, but also challenged deep-seated prejudices about disability and capability. Marcus, however, was already focused on the state finals, his mind racing with ideas for how to improve his presentation. For him, this victory wasn't an ending. It was just another step toward his greater goals. The aftermath of the court hearing spread like wildfire through both traditional and social media. News outlets across the country picked up the story of the brilliant young inventor who had not only revolutionized solar technology, but had also challenged and changed deep-rooted prejudices. 2 weeks after the hearing, Marcus sat in his modified home laboratory, making final adjustments to his presentation for the state finals. The walls of his lab, once bare, were now covered with letters of support from students and scientists worldwide. But one letter held a special place above his workbench, a formal apology from Judge Hamilton, handwritten and deeply personal. "Marcus," Dr. Johnson called from the doorway, holding up her tablet. "You might want to see this." The screen showed a live news broadcast where Judge Hamilton was speaking at a disability rights conference. "Meeting Marcus Johnson changed more than just my perspective on disability," the judge was saying. "It made me confront my own biases and realize how many brilliant minds we might be overlooking because of our preconceptions." Marcus smiled, but quickly returned to his work. The state finals were just days away, and he was determined to make his presentation perfect. His mother watched him with pride, remembering all the obstacles they had overcome to reach this point. Later that afternoon, an unexpected visitor arrived at their home, Mr. Roberts, the school's science department head who had initially rejected Marcus's project. He looked nervous as he stood in their living room. "Marcus," he began hesitantly, "I've been doing a lot of thinking since the hearing. We're creating a new STEM program for students with disabilities, and we'd like your input on how to make it truly inclusive." Marcus considered the request carefully before responding. "I'll help on one condition," he said. "The program shouldn't separate students with disabilities from others. Integration and collaboration are more important than accommodation." Mr. Roberts nodded, taking notes on his phone. "Would you be willing to mentor some of our younger students? Your story has inspired many of them to pursue their interests in science, regardless of their challenges." Before Marcus could respond, his phone buzzed with an email notification. His eyes widened as he read it. The National Science Foundation wanted to fund further development of his solar panel technology, with a special focus on making it accessible to developing nations. "Mom," he called out, his voice trembling with excitement, "they want to help make this available worldwide." Dr. Johnson read the email over his shoulder, her eyes filling with tears of joy. This was everything they had hoped for, not just recognition of Marcus's abilities, but the chance to make a real difference in the world. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. News crews came and went, interviewing Marcus about both his invention and his upcoming participation in the state finals. But the most meaningful moment came when a group of students with various disabilities visited from the local middle school. "How did you not give up?" one young girl in a wheelchair asked him, "when people said you couldn't do it." Marcus looked at her thoughtfully. "Because I knew they were wrong," he replied simply. "And sometimes proving people wrong is the best motivation you can have." The impact of Marcus's story continued to ripple outward. The school board, true to their word, had begun revising their policies on inclusive education. Judge Hamilton had become an outspoken advocate for disability rights in education. Even Mr. Peterson, the school board's lawyer, had written an article about how the case had changed his perspective on ability and potential. One evening, as Marcus worked late in his lab, Dr. Johnson found him staring at his prototype solar panel with a contemplative expression. "What are you thinking about, sweetheart?" she asked. "About how sometimes the biggest breakthrough isn't the invention itself," he replied, "but the changes it creates in how people think." She nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. The court case had done more than vindicate Marcus's work. It had challenged fundamental assumptions about disability, capability, and potential. As the day of the state finals approached, Marcus received one final surprise. The organizing committee had asked him to give the keynote speech, focusing not just on his invention, but on the importance of looking past physical limitations to see the potential in every person. That night, as he practiced his speech, Marcus added a line that summed up everything he had learned through this journey. "The only real disability is being limited by other people's expectations." The state finals were just the beginning. Marcus Johnson was ready to show the world that the greatest breakthroughs often come from those who refuse to be defined by their limitations. 6 months after the memorable court hearing, Marcus Johnson stood on stage at the National Science Awards ceremony in Washington, D.C. The same hands that had trembled in Judge Hamilton's courtroom now held the highest honor in youth scientific achievement, the National Merit Award for Scientific Innovation. The audience, filled with leading scientists, educators, and policymakers, listened intently as Marcus delivered his acceptance speech. Despite his physical challenges, his voice carried clearly through the grand hall. "Science isn't about who you are or what limitations you might have," he said, his words measured and strong. "It's about curiosity, determination, and the belief that everything is possible until proven otherwise." In the front row, Dr. Patricia Johnson watched her son with tears of joy. Beside her sat Judge Hamilton, who had become one of Marcus's strongest advocates and had flown in specially for this ceremony. The judge who had once mocked him was now introducing Marcus to colleagues as one of the brightest minds of his generation. Marcus's solar panel innovation had exceeded all expectations. Initial large-scale testing had confirmed the 40% efficiency increase, and several major manufacturing companies were already implementing his design. More importantly, thanks to Marcus's insistence, the technology remained open source, making it accessible to developing nations. The state science finals, which had started this whole journey, seemed like a distant memory now. Marcus had won first place there, but that victory paled in comparison to what followed. His invention had sparked a global conversation about renewable energy accessibility and inspired countless young scientists, particularly those with disabilities. After the ceremony, during the reception, a young girl in a wheelchair approached Marcus. She held up a notebook filled with calculations and diagrams. "I started my own science project because of you," she said shyly. "My teachers used to tell me it would be too difficult, but now they're helping me instead." Marcus smiled, remembering his own journey. "What's your project about?" he asked. As she explained her ideas for water purification technology, Marcus noticed several scientists gathering around, listening intently. The girl's eyes lit up as they asked questions and offered suggestions, seeing her ideas rather than her disability. Later that evening, Marcus received another surprise. The Department of Education announced a new national initiative, inspired by his case, to identify and support gifted students with disabilities. The program would be named the Johnson Initiative for Inclusive Excellence. "Your story changed everything," Dr. Rodriguez from Stanford told him. "We're seeing a wave of brilliant young minds who were previously overlooked because of their physical challenges. They just needed someone to show them it was possible." Back at their hotel room that night, Dr. Johnson found Marcus working on new calculations. "Shouldn't you be celebrating?" she asked. Marcus looked up from his tablet, his eyes bright with excitement. "Mom, I think I figured out how to improve the efficiency even further. This is just the beginning." The next morning's newspapers carried headlines about the youngest ever recipient of the National Merit Award, but they focused on more than just his scientific achievement. They told the story of how one young man's determination had challenged society's perceptions and opened doors for countless others. Judge Hamilton, who had become a close friend and mentor, put it best in his interview with the Washington Post. "Marcus Johnson didn't just innovate in solar technology. He showed us that the greatest disabilities are the limitations we place on others." As Marcus prepared to head home, his phone buzzed with messages from students worldwide, many sharing their own stories of overcoming barriers. He had become more than a scientist. He was a symbol of what was possible when ability was recognized beyond physical limitations. The final validation came in the form of a letter from the very school board that had once rejected his project. They were naming their new science building after him, with a plaque that would read, "Dedicated to Marcus Johnson, who taught us to see potential in every student." Marcus folded the letter carefully and placed it in his folder of memories. His mother watched him with understanding. This wasn't an ending, but a beginning. There were more discoveries to make, more barriers to break, and more minds to open. As they boarded their flight home, Marcus was already sketching new ideas on his tablet. The young scientist who had once been mocked in a courtroom had not only proven his worth, but had changed the way society viewed capability and potential. His legacy would inspire generations to come, reminding everyone that brilliance knows no physical bounds.